Hi, my name's Jack. Me and my group will be doing a presentation on the Department of Conservation, also known as DoC. Just a brief overview of DoC. It was formed in 1987. It is a public service department of the New Zealand government which is charged with the conservation of New Zealand's natural and historical heritage. It protects around 30% of all New Zealand land, which is around 8 million hectares. They are also charged with the protection of native wildlife. Today I will be speaking about waterways. Michael will be speaking about native wildlife. Zane will be speaking about 1080 and pest control. And Jay will be speaking about walkways and tourism. Today I'll be talking about waterways. You remember a few years back the New Zealand government sold our country as 100% pure. The government tried to sell our country as a clean and pure environment to the visiting tourists, but sadly this was not true. In an international study of 189 countries, New Zealand was ranked 18th worst overall. Water pollution in New Zealand is an increasing concern to environmentalists and regulatory bodies. It is estimated that over half of New Zealand waterways are polluted. It is suggested that the rapid increase in farms being converted into dairy farms is a leading reason. Just to give you an idea of how much dairy farming has increased over the last few years, more than 280,000 hectares of land have been converted from farming to dairy farming across the nation between the years of 1996 and 2008. At the same time, sheep and beef farming land has dropped by around 500,000 hectares. It's had a huge impact on the Canterbury region, as we've had 122,500 hectares of land converted into dairy. Our nitrogen levels in the water have increased by in the land have increased by 27%. Nitrogen is a useful nutrient for plants so that they can grow, but in high dosages it can be lethal to humans. A study using water quality data from 1996 to 2002 found that the vast majority of lowland rivers and streams passing through pastoral land are polluted. The Waikato River has long been a historical water pollution problem. It now fails health regulations for human contact. What is DoC doing about this vast pollution in New Zealand waterways? Fonterra and DoC have teamed up to spend $20 million on a countrywide investment to improve natural habitats of some key waterways around New Zealand over the next 10 years. The spending of this $20 million with Fonterra, it's part of its living water initiatives. The investment will initially focus on 5 key catchments in significant dairy regions. Fonterra and DoC will work with local communities to make difference to the water quality in 5 waterways. These are the Kaipara Harbour, Firth of Thames, Waikato Peak Lakes, Hora Lake Ellesmere, and the Awareru Waituna. The National Party has also pledged to spend $100 million over the next 10 years buying and retiring land next to waterways on farmland. Overall, the Department of Conservation and partner with Fonterra are working together to restore New Zealand's waterways. The over 400,000 kilometres and 4,000 lakes of the New Zealand's are an important resource and an important part to our economy as a whole.
Hello everyone, my name is James McClellan and it is a pleasure to be speaking with you today. Today I would like to introduce you to the status of the Conservation Department and specifically to the financial aspects of the walking tracks, tourism, and huts. The information displayed in this PowerPoint was taken from a variety of sources. These include a report released by the Department of Conservation ending in June 2013, government-released statistics, and a report from the Auditor General. Now that we have that out of the way, let's get started. Firstly, it is important to establish why conservation is necessary. You see, environmental degradation is happening whether we like it or not. For instance, the quality and availability of water in New Zealand are both increasing problems. Another problem can be seen in the rapid erosion of topsoil. Having said that, it's not my intention to go into depth on such topics, but to only use them as examples to show you why the Conservation Department is so important. However, all good things in life come with a price, and the tourism, huts, and walking tracks in New Zealand are no exception. You see, New Zealand is fortunate to possess one of the most beautiful environments in the world, and it is of the highest importance for the Conservation Department to do everything in its power to maintain such beauty. Really, New Zealand is simply investing in its future by conserving the environment, and I mean this both as an environmental and economic sense. Because of New Zealand's incredible environment, it is naturally a favorite location for tourists. And by protecting these natural wonders, New Zealand will be a favorite tourist destination for years to come. Allow me to be specific. Tourism, huts, walking tracks of New Zealand's nature is what makes it so wonderful in the first place. And it is imperative for them to be maintained. If not, people will be incapable of experiencing New Zealand's beauty in the same way that they have done previously. Now, this brings us to the question of what has the Department of Conservation done to improve these aspects? Well, if you're patient with me just a little bit longer, I will tell you. Through various partnerships, the Department of Conservation has taken steps to ensure that these areas will be continually improved and will also provide revenue like never before. The first of such partnerships can be seen with Air New Zealand. This partnership began in 2012 and has blossomed ever since. For instance, Air New Zealand has offered its services in transporting endangered species across the country. Another example of the fruits of this partnership can be seen in Air New Zealand's promotion of the Routeburn track. They showed a promotional video of the track during its in-air entertainment system. In the following year, there was an increase 13% in Great Walk bookings. Such an increase can hardly be overstated. However, to the tune of $566,000 in additional revenue, it can still be stated quite nicely. The next partnership can be seen with the DoC New Zealand. This is a 3-year partnership that includes the painting and restoration of huts and other historic assets across New Zealand. Within 2 weeks of this project being announced, more than 10,000 people became involved in the planning. And to top it all off, DoC has pledged $1.5 million to the Department of Conservation over the duration of the partnership. Talk about making it happen. Another aspect in which the Department of Conservation has improved its services is through its new One approach. This simply means that all of the Department of Conservation's visitor centers will be priced nationally. Also, staff members at such centers are now subject to enhanced customer service training, meaning they will have a greater ability to serve tourists in the future. Just New Zealand is another promising avenue for the Conservation Department. This comes as a result of Just New Zealand marketing the department's great walks to their travel partners. You see, it is significant because Just New Zealand works with a substantial amount of travel partners. The possibilities from this partnership have serious potential. Having said all that, it is clear that the Conservation Department is headed in the right direction. Now, let's examine the evidence. As of March 2014, there was an increase in tourist spending of 7.4%. This equates to $709 million and represents the biggest yearly increase in over a decade. Now, let's look at a few more numbers. International tourism represents a significant portion of New Zealand's total exports, as it made up 15.3% this past year. This equates to $10.3 billion. Tourism also generated about 4% of the GDP. This was to the tune of $8.3 billion. And indirect value of industries supporting tourism generate an additional $6.5 billion for tourism, which is about 3.1% of the GDP. 94,100 full-time employee equivalents were able to have jobs as a result of the tourism industry. This represents about 4.7% of total employment in the entire nation. Lastly, we see that tourists were responsible for $1.8 billion in GST income. Now, let's shift our focus to the Hudson walking tracks. How did these Hudson tracks do financially this past year? Well, let's find out. Revenue increased from the backcountry huts by 4.1%. Conservation campsites increased in revenue by 32.1%. And the Great Walks saw an increase in revenue of 13.3%. Progress. In closing, we see that the Department of Conservation is moving in the right direction. They are doing such in an economic and environmental sense. They have made significant strides in the past few years, and there is no reason to think this trend will not continue. I thank you for your time. Have a great day.
The Department of Conservation is actively involved in maintaining and improving situations for wildlife in New Zealand. This is especially important in New Zealand because we are seen as being biodiverse. Biodiversity is defined as the biological variability among living organisms from all sources, land and water, and the ecological complexities which they are a part. Biodiversity includes diversity within species, between species, and of ecosystems. As New Zealand is biodiverse, it is home to an exceptionally high number of indigenous species, some of which are endemic to New Zealand. This puts additional pressure on the Department of Conservation, as there is a large degree of accountability associated with these threatened species. An example of the Department of Conservation protecting biodiversity is found in our offshore islands. DoC manages about 220 islands larger than 5 hectares and hundreds of smaller islands and rock stacks. The offshore islands contain one of the world's largest range of seabirds, from tropical birds in the north to albatrosses and penguins in the south. These islands are the last refuge for some of these animals, so ensuring they have havens free from natural threats such as pests is of the utmost importance. This is where DoC plays its role. An example of DoC ensuring safety of these havens is the eradication of the rat population of Campbell Island. Rats had continued to wreak havoc on the island's wildlife, causing populations of the few species of seabirds that managed to hang on being severely reduced, and any land bird species that tried to get re-established on the island were easily killed off by the rats. The idea of removing the rats from Campbell Island was considered by most just to be a dream, but this changed in 2001 after more than 20 years of preparation, research and technological advancement. A DoC team headed to the island to take it back from the rat. In total, 120 tonnes of cereal bait containing an anticoagulant were spread across the island using helicopters, 3 spreading the bait and 1 ferrying the bait back and forth. By the time the project was completed, it had involved DoC staff, Royal New Zealand Navy, Royal New Zealand Air Force, the Met Service, 4 helicopter companies, 2 shipping companies and numerous other people and agencies who provided their time and skills. This is an example of collaboration with other citizens to achieve a positive outcome, which shows a shift from public administration logic to public governance logic, where citizens are seen as co-producers rather than constituents, and the structure of the organisation is network-based. This is further discussed in DoC's performance audit report, where there has been ecosystem-based collaboration with community groups and other local authorities. An example of this is in the case of the Pikiti Forest Trust, where over 20,000 hectares of forest are under the protection of DoC with the cooperation of the Trust. DoC staff provide the Trust with support, technical advice and land equipment, which is used to maintain pest control and monitoring activities. The performance outcomes of this is that the populations of native bird species are increasing, including kiwi. Pest control has been effective enough to start reintroduction of native birds and other wildlife that had been lost to the forest previously. It is only through the collaboration of government and public agencies and a shift towards public governance logic that this has been possible to fill the key performance aspects of effectiveness and citizen satisfaction. In 2012 and 2013, DoC spent about $202 million managing biodiversity. With the resources it has, DoC is able to actively manage only a small proportion, about 1/8, of New Zealand's conservation land, and only about 200 of 2,800 threatened species. This further highlights the need for community integration in the conservation effort, which would allow for other agencies to be better utilised and allow for larger proportions of land and threatened species to be managed and allow for New Zealand's biodiverse and native population to thrive.
Performance and accountability isn't always a cut and dry issue, and it becomes more and more difficult to deal with when you add more and more people into the mix. Government departments will often struggle with multiple conflicting interests within the group of people they're supposed to be serving, and the Department of Conservation is no exception to that. They've always been special in this respect. Even amongst government departments renowned for offending people, the Department of Conservation has always made a special effort to have annoyed this water group, this farming lobby, this iwi, anything like that. And even amongst an impressive list of issues the Department of Conservation grapples with on a regular basis, the use of 1080 does stand out as a grand bone of contention. Chemically speaking, 1080 is sodium fluoroacetate. It looks and tastes a lot like table salt, but has an additional side effect where a large dose does its absolute best to shut down a cell's citric acid cycle and kill you. It's present naturally in some plants, including the ones we use to make cups of tea, and we use it here in New Zealand as a pesticide. How we got to this point is a fairly miserable tale in itself. Shortly after New Zealand was colonised, the English began to feel a bit homesick and decided to add some animals from home to the environment. So they set some rabbits loose and the population absolutely exploded. So they decided to release ferrets, stoats and weasels into the environment to deal with the rabbit problem, thinking that while they're at home, ferrets, stoats and weasels eat rabbits. But being the shrewd creatures they are, they quickly figured out that it was a lot easier to eat the native birds that were wandering around with no natural defences. Possums also got added as a food and pelt source, and feral cats have always been around as long as the English have. So now we have lots of rabbits, lots of pests, and almost no native birds left. Deer and boar are also an issue, as they are capable of eating their way through entire forests with ease if their numbers get too high. They were introduced in the 1860s and quickly got to unmanageable numbers. The government offered a bounty per tail from the 1930s to the 1960s, which culminated in the helicopter-based deer wars, where rival companies fought, sabotaged and poached their way to making as much money out of the dwindling deer population as they possibly could. The government eventually legislated this away, in part due to the borderline lawless nature of the industry, and as a result, 1080 is currently the main answer to pests in New Zealand. We use about 80% of the 1080 produced worldwide. It is applied by DoC staff in a variety of ways, including aerial drops over rugged terrain. Let's face it, we have a lot of rugged terrain here. It's delivered as pellets, which are then ideally eaten by the target species. Secondary poisoning can occur, that is to say that an animal can be poisoned by eating the body of a previous 1080 victim. As a form of pest control, it is incredibly cost effective, which is part of why both the Labour and national governments have been more than happy to permit its use. If correctly applied, a single 1080 drop can kill 98% of possums and 90% of rats in a target area. While some will always survive, this is simply the nature of a pest species, the population drop provides a time frame for any native species present to breed and boost their numbers a bit. It isn't so effective against deer unless the area they're in is so sparse that they see the pellets on the ground and can actually eat them. A concern has been that native bird species themselves are being poisoned by 1080, and when it started out this was the case. Over time it's been refined to attract predators and deter the species being protected, however. This included adding cinnamon of all things to repel birds. All of this goes to show that 1080 is having the desired effect. It works wonders in terms of controlling pests, especially in the absence of viable alternatives. With that said, it's a rare and beautiful thing when a government department is able to please everybody, and 1080 is not without its vocal opponents. Hunting associations, animal rights groups, and a few political parties are particularly opposed to it, and in recent weeks someone has been so opposed to it that they have threatened to lace baby powder with 1080 unless it is no longer in use by the end of March. Most anti-1080 groups have strongly condemned this action, however. Most of the complaints are due to perceived animal cruelty, or from hunters whose dogs run the risk of eating pellets and being poisoned. There is also opposition from the possum fur trade, who believe they lose business as a result of large numbers of possums being poisoned. However, they never made enough of a dent in the population of an area to be considered effective. They'd more commonly trap the ones that were easiest to find, wait until the population dropped, and then move on to the next most populated area, leaving the bulk of the possums untouched. Supporters of 1080 are listed here. Labor and national governments, as I've said, have agreed with its use. The Greens are neutral on the issue. They think it could be done better, but acknowledge that it has to be a case. The same with the Royal RSPCA. Forest and Bird, Federated Farmers and the Animal Health Board are also all in line with it. Federated Farmers in particular because possums are a vector for bovine tuberculosis, of all things. So this goes to show that 1080 covers a vast range of areas and does a lot of work in dealing with people. Some of their stuff is a top-down issue. Their 1080 stuff, they do not acknowledge the input of the community, preferring instead to operate from a government perspective down. In other issues, such as working with huts or collaborating in the help with Campbell Island, they will collaborate with the entire community and move in a direction that wants to please everybody. Thank you for your time. We will be moving on to questions.
The information that I got for this study was from a 3 News website. Sadly, I couldn't find the original site and I can't find the original information, but I did find another site which had the same information. It was giantflightlessbirds.com. The study was an international study of 189 countries, with China, US and Brazil all obviously being in the top 20, but surprisingly enough, New Zealand was 18th worst overall. They got the information by taking pollution information and stats from several different sources and using this to come up with the database.
As you may know, the dairy and agriculture industries in New Zealand have grown rapidly. This has resulted in increased demand for water. In order to tackle this problem, the Department of Conservation has implemented restrictions on water use for irrigation in the dairy shed. It has also encouraged competition with other freshwater suppliers, and has finally hoping to instill a duty throughout New Zealand to manage fresh water in a more sustainable manner.
There is some research being done on whether there's more cost-effective or better poison for 1080, but for the most part, DoC is actually quite happy to continue using it. Studies have shown that it works extremely well, and any small detriment to the environment it may have is well and truly outweighed by the vast benefit it has. It is absurdly cost-effective as a form of pest control, as we've stated a couple of times, and on the whole, not really. They're willing to keep using it for as long as it's effective for.
Hunting and trapping are alternatives to 1080, but only in limited numbers of circumstances. This method is very labour intensive, requires a lot of access, and seldom has enough impact apart from locally effective operations. By comparison, a well-managed aerial drop of 1080 will reduce populations of possums by over 90% at a tiny comparison of the price of the alternatives.